Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I am honored to be joined in conversation by one of Connecticut's true literary luminaries, Sari Rosenblatt. Known best for her short stories, Sari is both a teacher and the author of the collection Father Guards the Sheep, which won the prestigious Iowa Short Fiction Award in 2020. It's a particularly meaningful honor given that Sari earned an MFA from the Iowa Writers' Workshop, which she attended in the 1980s. The collection includes 8 pieces that are as entertaining as they are illuminating, and that are unified by the exploration of family dynamics and the relationship between fathers and children. Each contains those telling details that let you know fact-inspired fiction. Wally Lamb said, like the fiction of the great Ann Tyler, Sari Rosenblatt's Father Guards the Sheep is populated with characters who are humane, sympathetic, and lovably askew. Rosenblatt's 8 stories are polished, perfect gems. Sari has also earned short story awards from Glimmer Train, New Millennial Writing, Ms. Magazine, and Nimrod International Journal of Prose and Poetry. Recently, Sari and I sat down for a virtual visit in which she generously reflected on the craft of composing short stories, which has allowed her to honor her life through her art. This is part 1 of that conversation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Central Booking. I am really excited today to be in the company of Sari Rosenblatt, who is the author of Father Guards the Sheep, which won the prestigious Iowa Short Fiction Award. So, Sari, thank you so much for being here. It's delightful to meet you after all our back and forth online. We've never actually seen each other's faces before, but here we are.
Hi, John. Thank you. And you're a handsome guy.
Oh,
And
you're kind.
I'm really so pleased you took an interest in the book. Thank you so very much.
I have to say 2 things really quickly. I'm going to say thank you, Jill Fletcher, because Jill
Uh,
Fletcher, who is an amazing writer, book doctor, just all around awesome person. She said that I needed to read your book and we needed to talk. And if Jill tells me to do something, I usually do because she doesn't lead me wrong. And she certainly didn't in this case. And I also have to say that I loved the book. I don't tend to read a lot of short stories, and when I do, they're anthologies, and so a lot of times it's multiple contributors. So, the quality varies and the style varies. And so sometimes I fall out of them. But it's a short book, but it's a great book. And usually, I read sort of as quickly as I can just because I read a lot. And I want to know enough to have an intelligible conversation. But I found myself putting the book down, not because I didn't like it, but because I knew that it was short and I wanted to stay with the characters a little bit longer and be sort of immersed in their world. And that doesn't happen very often, to me, and especially with short stories. So I just wanted to thank you for that experience. And of course, Jill, who we both know, gave us this gift. But anyway, that's all. It's a really, really wonderful collection, and it was a great experience for me and a little bit different than what I'm accustomed to. So I wanted to acknowledge that, and now I will, of course, let you speak because that is the point of this. But Father Guards the Sheep, it's a great title, and it's a line from a German lullaby. So I was wondering if you can tell us how the title, sort of represents the stories that are contained within.
um, well, first of all, I was so happy to hear that you slowed down a little when you read the stories because I'm very much a word by word writer, sentence by sentence. I don't expect everyone to have a generosity of spirit to really take that in, but I'm so pleased when people say I had to read it slowly because it's meant to be a read where you take in every word. So thank you, John. Father Guards the Sheep, that's the title story, Father Guards the Sheep. And of the 8 stories in the collection, it's the one I wrote most recently. These stories span a 30-year period. But that was the last one I wrote. And I'll just say briefly, it's a story about this young woman. She's in her 20s, and she's a liar. She lies to she kind of creates her own world, and she lies in a sense to get what she wants. Sometimes it's altruistic, but sometimes it gets her to where she wants to be. And in the case of this story, it gets her close to her mother. She lies to get this job with the New Haven arson squad. It's fun, there's absolutely comic touches in these stories, serial comic. So she lies to get that job. Um, and in developing that story, I'm thinking she wants to be close to her mother. She's living in New Jersey, but she lies to get this job, brings her to Connecticut, closer to her mother. And in the course of writing this story, I'm thinking, what about the father? And this came late to me in the story after 20 revisions. I'm thinking, what about the father? And I developed this character, the father, who is really just a memory to her. He abandons the family when she's quite young. And he's more memory. But his influence is profound. The absent father who nevertheless has a profound influence. And what she remembers about him is his coming into her room at night, standing in the doorway, and reciting a German lullaby. I think it goes Schlaf, Kindlein Schlaf. She never even knows what it means. I translate it for the title because really what it means is, well, sleep, baby, sleep, thy father guards the sheep. She doesn't even know what it means, but the sense of him being in the room and saying this lullaby, and his distance is profound, his absence, and in a way, she creates a life that wants to recreate family. This is where the arson squad comes in. But I think that lines, the German lullaby, connected with me strongly. You don't know how things will connect with you, but my own father, who passed away at 92, but when he was quite elderly, 90 or 88, somehow we were talking about prayer. I don't know. We never talked about anything of substance. It was always very jokey with him. He was either jokey or glum and solemn and, wickedly insulting. So I don't know how we got on the subject of prayer or going to sleep. He said, I say a prayer every night before I go to bed. And I go, you said a prayer? He said, yes, I say a prayer. It was said to me by my German nanny. And I said, you had a German nanny? This is all revelatory. Where did this come from? And I said, do you remember it? And normally he would answer anything about a memory with like, who the hell knows? But in this case, he recited this German prayer, and I didn't write it down. I don't know what it was, but when I was developing the character of the father in this story, Father Guards the Sheep, I came across this German lullaby, and then it had resonance to me with my own father. And I used that kind of as kind of a defining feature, a cohesive feature of the entire book,
Sure.
because every single story here has a father that exerts some kind of influence. In the case of Daughter of Retail, the first story, he's this comic, blustery retail magnate of this, in this small town. He runs this department store and he's the chief. And very much my father and my family clothing store. And then that first story links very strongly with the last story,
Yes.
Which is called As in Life. And in the first story, the Daughter of Retail, the narrator is 12. And in the last story, the narrator is probably in her mid-30s. She comes home to visit her family because the father in the story is now dying.
Right.
And the mother has to find nursing care. But so we see the father at different points in his life. We see the daughter at different points in her life. And in every story, there is a father who's either running the show, the ringmaster, or maybe off to the side, but still exerting a pretty significant influence.
Sure. And so what you just mentioned about the German lullaby and, learning these things from your father at the age of 90 that he hadn't shared in all the years
Right.
that time. I love how that shows, that you can take a kernel of something from real life and then it feeds a short story. And there's, obviously it's fictionalized, but there's an essence of truth to it. And I was wondering if you had any other, examples that you might like to share about the ideas or the inspirations from real life that later developed into fictional stories that people will find in this book.
A lot of the kernels, well, yes, so much of it is from real life, but then wildly fictionalized, I should say. And a lot of them come from jobs I had. So even daughter of retail, I mean, I did grow up in my father's store. I did dust purses, that were covered with industrial dust from the rubber company across the street. In the story, Harvester, the character has a job where she does something called content analysis. You read newspaper articles and look for different themes and look for content that applies to what you're researching. And I did do this. I was a research assistant at Yale, and I had to pull out things about the Cold War. And back then, everything was microfiche, and it was the early stages of computers, and every bit of content had a number associated with it. I mean, it's so arcane now that it became very comic to me. And so she and her employer, the professor, are talking numbers because the content code has a numerical equivalent, so we would talk 5003. 5003, it's really 5004. How could you think, she gets fired. The father guards the sheep. I did work for, it was called arson warning and prevention strategy. And my job was, in fact, to do, again, there was a research component, research public data to find out what houses might be at risk to be torched by the owner. So, yeah, so a lot are taken from jobs, but one that's very dear to me is the story Harvester. No, I'm sorry. No, it is it's the same story, Harvester. And I draw a lot from my family, of course. Not of course, but if you read the book, if you know me, you'll know a lot comes from my family. So Harvester, the original name for that story, as I say, I revised for 30, 40 times, was called Doghouse. It was called Doghouse, and it was inspired by my brother Steve, who since, sadly, this may come up, but Steve died. Two of my dear brothers have died in the last 6 months, within 6 months of each other, and not from COVID. Nevertheless, they have provided a profound influence on my life, my writing life. So, but my brother Steve, he always had dogs, he and his wife. And I was charmed by the fact that over the phone, I never saw the doghouse, but that he was building a doghouse with a solar doghouse with solar panels. This was way before solar became, ubiquitous, became everyone, we have solar panels. But I was so charmed by the fact that he was building a doghouse with solar panels and the effort and the love he put into it. And So I started writing that story. If you don't mind, I just came across the original version of that story before it was revised, and it began with the image of the doghouse. So I started this old version. In September, Seth began building the solar doghouse. A simple statement. They had a lot of S's in it. September, Seth, solar. I thought these S's are going to propel me through the story. And in fact, they must have, but I didn't. I needed more. I needed more. So I went back, and instead of the story starting there, I start the story in a wildly different place, which goes like this. In those 6 years following college, I had just one employer, New York University. And for 3 of those years, I had just one boyfriend, Ted. So a very different start, nevertheless inspired by the solar doghouse, which becomes uh, its own, in a way, a metaphor for this woman who can't decide if she wants to move in with a boyfriend or not. But it's not heavy-handed metaphor. There's comic touches, and in much of it is recalled from real life. So um, that's often a starting point, even a small image, that I remember from real life, as in The New Frontier, when it begins with a mother boiling old long playing record albums, boiling them in a pot, record albums, and then fluting the edges and making it a base for a floral arrangement. And when I thought about it years later, I thought, that is so silly. That is kind of ridiculous. I mean, it worked, and she put dry flowers in the center, but somehow that image helped me develop the character of that mother who was doing it,
Right.
in a little boy who observes it, and then of course the father comes in, kind of this blowhard guy. Um, all right, so to answer your question, and I can tell stories within stories within stories, but yes, to answer your question, so much comes from my life.
No, I love it. And I love those telling details because you'll be reading something, and as a reader, it will be so specific, and sort of so unique that okay, this came from a real place because who could ever dream this up? Because, like you said with the
Yeah,
record, like, people did that? That's
yeah,
amazing. Um, And two, to
yeah.
your point about the doghouse, I think it's so funny. People say, if you want to know somebody's character, see how they treat their mother. I think, yes, that's true, but also see how they treat their pets. And if they're going to build their, dog
Oh,
house, you know that person a little bit better.
right. That's so true. And the story becomes really a loving gesture. And it's really this new boyfriend trying to
Right.
woo his girlfriend into staying with him. And he does
Right.
it by building the doghouse.
And give the dog a little bit of comfort too. I'm like, oh,
Exactly.
he's making it
Yeah.
better for everybody, or at least trying to. And so I wanted to ask you too. You mentioned, that you have characters in these stories. Some recur throughout the book, so they appear in 2 or 3 stories. Other stories are completely, standalone. But one of those characters is Ellen, who you mentioned, who is the young lady who works in retail at the beginning, and then at the end of the book, she comes home and sort of meets her father is an aging man who needs a bit of help himself. And then you also have a married couple, Sam and Sonny. So I was just wondering if you can talk about what compels you, to revisit certain characters if it's more than just an issue of time, and how you like to sort of play with their character development when you can see them either from different perspectives or at a different point in time in their lives.
Um, I think these characters are just compelling to me, and some are based on my life. And in the case of Ellen Schmur and Schmur's department store, I wanted very much to memorialize Schmer's department store, which is a takeoff on Rosenblatt's department store, which is still in existence. It's probably 125 years old. It's soon to be sold, and that's another story. Maybe that will appear in a story. But Daughter of Retail I wrote long ago, and because it was important to me to capture a bit of Rosenblatt's or Schmer's department store. It's a love story to Rosenblatt's department store. It's a hearkening back to the industrial heyday of Naugatuck, Connecticut, where those stories take place. The rubber company, Uniroyal, which I call US Rubber, which was the manufacturer of kids' sneakers. Naugahyde, if people know Naugahyde, that was produced in Naugatuck. And I began with that story. And then later in my own life, it was true that my father was aging and had come out of a nursing home, and my mother needed help. We needed live-in help. And that whole experience was, not to sound so, I don't know, whatever, high and mighty. I wanted to turn it into art. I wanted to take these experiences and both memorialize them and turn them into kind of an art form in the form of a short story. So it's the same character, Ellen Schmer, a little bit of me, a little bit of absolutely not me. But it was important for me to tell that story. Sometimes it's just important to tell a story, and I wanted to capture that moment in my life, in my parents' life. And as my father is aging, Schmer's department store is aging too. And now it's kind of, as they say, a shell of its former self, but it's transformed. The customer base is different. The brother who we see in the first story, Stuart, is again in the last story. And he's keeping the store afloat by selling Catholic school uniforms now, keeping the lights low because he can't afford a full lit 2-floor store. Kind of the same characters, although going back to real life, in the character of Stuart, who appears in the first story and the last story. In the first story, the brother Stuart is based again on my brother Steve. In the last story, he's morphed into my brother Howie. Both brothers get equal due. And on another sad note, Howie passed away also about 2 months ago. So for me, I'm so pleased these stories were published to kind of, honor my brothers, at a point where at least one brother read the story.
Right.
But so those stories are very much bookends in the collection. When you put together a collection of short stories, it's a whole enterprise under itself. How are you going to order now these stories? Right. All of which, except for Five Sheep, had been published, at very different times over the years. But so making the bookends seemed to me a satisfying kind of ordering of the stories. And then you mentioned two other stories that are linked with the characters of Sonny and Sam, I believe, or did I make him Seth? I'm not sure. I did. In putting together the collection, I renamed. But they also reflect a time in my life where I was raising little children, and these are more, I hate to call them domestic stories, but they are, because they get into the day-to-day domestic life. And again, I wanted to turn that kind of the tiresome details, repetitive details of everyday life into memorialize them into a kind of art form. Folding clothes, washing dishes, but it's all in the context of larger issues. Let me see. And one of those stories is actually told from the point of view of a father. It's the only, well, two stories, maybe The New Frontier, and in this story, what do I call it? Communion, where it's told from the point of view of a male. And in this story, the man is kind of beleaguered at work, feeling a little bit underdog in his professional life, in a market. I think he's managing a food market. This is fictionalized. And he feels demeaned by the boss, and he comes home and he wants a little something from his family. He wants a little of attention, but he gets overshadowed by this woman who out of nowhere has parked herself on his front steps. And now the household is abuzz about who is this woman, and his wife, Sonny, what can we do for her? And who is she? And she's a sad story. And he's thinking about, but what about me?
He wants his hot dinner.
And where's my dinner? And then so in fact, in real life, there came a day where there was a strange woman on my porch. And my husband comes home and he goes, who is she? And I don't know, it was just so odd. I had to write a story about it. And also I had to bring in I don't know what you call it, the nunnery across the street. We had these nuns who lived across the street, kind of an inner city street, but we love these nuns. I don't know, they kept us even, just knowing they were there. I'm a Jewish person who loves nuns. I've always loved nuns.
Nothing wrong with that.
It has to do with the movie The Trouble with Angels with Haley Mills.
Oh,
you don't know this, John. You don't know that.
Haley Mills, though, so I'm with you.
Haley Mills, and she's in a boarding school with nuns, and that started Rosalind Russell. It all goes back to Rosalind Russell. I loved her as a nun. Okay.
But see, it's so true. Like they say, the truth is stranger than fiction, and it really is, because then it becomes fiction. Because what do you do, with these scraps of memory that nobody's going to believe?
Right. You have to make it real. You have to create these worlds and make it absolutely true.
Yeah, and it's like you read it and you say, okay, that's a telling detail, and it really grounds a story. And just, I do have obviously more questions for you, but real quick, I just wanted to make a quick comment, because you were saying, in short stories like yours that are sort of domesticated, the premise can be very simple. And I think that that's something that I really enjoy, because I tend to read a lot of genre fiction, and, it's all about the premise, and you have to have a flashy premise, because if you're not engaged by the little blurb on the book, you're going to stop reading. And what I loved about this story is it's really sort of a celebration of the simple things and the profundity that can be found in our everyday lives. And I think that we just need to take a minute to sit back and sort of realize that it's the small things that life is all about. It's not some grand, flashy gesture. It's the daily living that we're all doing. And I think that resonated with me as somebody who tends to read a lot of, mystery, suspense, thriller, to really sit back and say, okay, but there's something to be said for, real life and real trials and tribulations.
Thank you, John. You're my perfect reader.
Oh,
You're my perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's what I do. I take these small things and make something of it.
Yeah, it's so great. It's great. And I wanted to ask you too, so I think we're just a bridge apart, because I think you're in Middletown and I'm in Portland. I mean, but you are a Connecticut person. And you feel that throughout the book, because you mentioned a lot of the stories take place in Naugatuck, and there's mentions of New Haven, and there's mentions of Middletown. And in a lot of ways, place may not seem really important to some of these stories, but I wanted to ask you, knowing where your characters are from and knowing that you've grown up, in these places, how does that inform your development of a character, knowing what their physical surroundings are, even if they're not necessarily integral to a story?
Um, I like to think about geography of place. Where the character is so important, and you can use all those elements of place to define the character. Daughter of Retail could not have happened anywhere else beside Naugatuck, Connecticut, in the factory across the street, the store itself, the smell of the store, I don't know, the merchandise. I'd like to think that the surroundings very much inform the character. And if I'm stuck, if I'm in a story and I'm stuck, I just kind of use that geography of place. Well, what in that place can they interact with? Even in that story you mentioned, the stranger on the porch, that was the original title, and it became Communion, probably because of the nuns in the food being exchanged. But it was very much that neighborhood, in the neighbors, in the porch, in every, all those small details had a bearing on the movement of the story, how to move the story forward, how to create the characters. In Harvester, the one about the doghouse, even a kitchen drawer. Um, uh, the narrator's trying to find out who she is and who the boyfriend is, and can she trust him? Is he trustworthy? Is he going to fire her in the way that her boss fired her? So she's rummaging through his string drawer, the drawer where you throw everything, and she's looking for clues, she's looking for clues everywhere. And that's all small details about a place, but you can use that to kind of define who the character is and what the character wants. I'm trying to think of Father Guards the Sheep. I have her in her arson office, where she does her research work, and there's a wall, just a wall with posters, and the poster says arson kills. You use all those small little details of the place. It doesn't have to be a big place. It doesn't have to be mountains or, a lake or a river. It can be a wall with a poster, and what that says about the story, the universe, what it says about universe. So much of it is world building, and using those details of place to make the world so real that this really happened.
Sure.
This really happened to this person.
Sure.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.